It was the sort of summer afternoon which smells faintly of decaying boxwood and decayed secrets. The lanes around Marple Court, tucked 3 miles shy of Tothbury-on-Wem, twisted like gossip and narrowed like mines. The house itself, a Tudor monstrosity subjected to Georgian restraint and Victorian enthusiasm, loomed in contradictory splendor on the crest of a stony hill. To the casual visitor, it presented a front of polite ivy and muffled clocks. To Lord Peter Wimsey, it presented a murder, or at least a noise. "That," said Wimsey, pausing on the flagstone path and tilting his hat just so, was most definitely not the wind. "Sir," said Bunter, serene in the way only a man with 3 spare shirts in his valise could be. "The footsteps," said Wimsey, turning one ear toward the gabled upper floor, where lace curtains flinched slightly at the windows. "Came from upstairs. Not from above stairs, mind you, not the attic, but a sort of in-between. Rather like the morality of a bishop's nephew." "I believe the police are inside, my lord," said Bunter, who had already deduced as much from the presence of a Morris motor car bearing the discreet indignity of mud on its left wing. They had arrived at the invitation, if one could call it that, of the late Sir Septimus Reeve, who, being dead, had not technically issued the request himself. The telegram had come from his niece, Miss Alicia Reeve, who had written with all the grammar of grief and none of its precision. "Murder or suicide. Stop police incompetent. Stop uncle dead in library. Footsteps still heard. Stop, please come immediately. Stop." "I do admire brevity," Wimsey had remarked, ringing for a train timetable and polishing a cigarette in a manner which implied it might contain the solution to the entire affair. Now, at Marple Court, Wimsey ascended the front steps like a man arriving at a country fete rather than a crime scene. The butler, whose face resembled a pale pudding abandoned to set in draught, opened the door with the expression of one who privately considers the guest to be of a slightly lower order than the house silver but has been forced to polish him anyway. "Lord Peter Wimsey," said Wimsey, "and my man, Bunter, we were expected." The butler sniffed faintly. "Detective Inspector Goole is with the body, my lord." "Splendid," said Wimsey. "I do like an officer who doesn't wait for ceremony. Lead on, Macduff." They passed into a hallway of timbered melancholy. Everything about the place suggested a slightly over-educated ghost had chosen it for retirement. The air smelt of beeswax, pipe smoke, and family decay. Wimsey paused before a long case clock which was ticking with emphatic piety. "Set 10 minutes fast," he observed. "A touch anxious, this house." The library was panelled in dark oak and stocked with books that no one had opened since the Crimean War. In the centre of the room, upon an aubusson, rug the colour of dried liver, lay the body of Sir Septimus Reeve. He wore a velvet smoking jacket, slippers, and an expression of mild disapproval, as though the manner of his death had struck him as poorly staged. Detective Inspector Goole stood by the hearth, frowning with official sternness. "Lord Peter, I won't pretend to be surprised. I thought you might turn up once Miss Reeve started screaming about noises and nonsense." "Not noises, Inspector. Footsteps," Wimsey corrected amiably. "There's a material difference. Noises might be plumbing. Footsteps suggest someone has feet." Goole, who had met Wimsey before and retained an instinctive distrust of men who quoted Virgil at crime scenes, cleared his throat. "We've got the facts, my lord. Sir Septimus was found at 8:15 this morning by the housemaid. Gunshot wound to the chest, revolver near the hand, no note, doors locked from the inside, one window open a crack, but too narrow for entry. Nothing stolen. Doctor puts death between midnight and 3. That clock over there," he gestured to the mantelpiece, "was shattered in the fall. Stopped at 1:42. "Ah," said Wimsey. "The sacred hour. Was the sound heard?" Goole nodded. "Lady Julia, his sister-in-law, said she woke to the bang. Thought it might have been the grandfather clock. Went back to bed." And the footsteps? Miss Alessia swears she heard them at precisely 2:13, walking overhead, back and forth, but the library is beneath the guest bedroom. Empty last night. Whimsy bent beside the body, examining the position of the hands and the crumpled rug. He sniffed slightly. Cordite, but only faint, not quite as pungent as one would expect. The gun was an old .38, said Gould. Clean shot. No fingerprints but the victim's. Looks like suicide. Said Whimsy. But suicide seldom paces upstairs after death, and certainly not with such audible footwear. He wandered to the fireplace, where a brass salver gleamed with dutiful polish. Next to it, a decanter half full of brandy. 2 glasses. Only one had been used. Sir Septimus drank alone? Whimsy asked idly. Gould shrugged. He often did. But set 2 glasses. That implies intent to share, or perhaps a habit. He fingered the curtain cord and frowned. How curious. The dust here is disturbed, but only slightly, as if someone moved behind it, or stood. There was a silence in which the entire house seemed to lean forward to listen. Then Bunter, with the casual finality of a valet who sees all, said, "There are wet boot prints on the upper landing, my lord." Whimsy smiled faintly. "Now that," he said, "is rather more like it." And with that, the game, quiet, civilized, faintly rotten at the edges, was well and truly afoot. Whimsy rose from his examination of the curtain cord with the air of a man who had just detected the subtlest variation in the notes of a Bach fugue. He did not immediately follow Bunter's report about the boot prints, but instead moved toward the shattered clock on the mantel. With a handkerchief-wrapped finger, he turned the cracked face delicately and regarded the stopped hands with thoughtful detachment. 1:42, he murmured. Rather precise as such things go, but perhaps a little too obliging. One always wonders if clocks stop out of sympathy or design. Gould, who had been suppressing the urge to clear his throat since Whimsy entered the room, did so now with finality. "If you've something to say, my lord, I wish you'd say it plainly." "My dear Inspector," said Whimsy pleasantly, "if I ever said anything plainly, the world would collapse in a fit of apoplexy. No, no. Let me remain enigmatic a little longer, just until I'm sure which questions one ought not to ask. The answers are frightfully dull until then." He crossed to the decanter and sniffed the contents. "Brandy, as advertised. Recent. Still a trace of vapor. But only 1 glass used, you say?" Gould nodded. "Fingerprints confirm it. The others untouched." Whimsy turned it in his hand, peering at the inside rim. "Not quite. There's a faint smear at the lip. Not fingerprints. More like a trace of lipstick or pomade. Wiped, but not washed." Gould's face twitched. "Lady Julia? Too red in the mouth and too pale in the soul," Whimsy said airily. "But one mustn't rule out Alicia. She writes telegrams in upper case. That speaks to a certain emotional style." Gould rolled his eyes. "You'll be wanting to speak to them, I suppose." Whimsy turned. "Oh, quite. But first I'd like to see those wet boot prints Bunter mentioned. Lead on." They mounted the staircase together. The upper floor of Marple Court retained the hush peculiar to houses where the dead are still on the premises. The corridor was thick-carpeted and dim, with ancestral portraits tilting forward in their frames as if eavesdropping. Bunter stood with impeccable stillness at the far end, gesturing discreetly toward the landing outside the blue guest room. There, across the faded oriental runner, was a trail of damp impressions, half-formed and irregular, as though the wearer had walked with hesitation or unsteadiness. The boots had been narrow-soled, masculine, but worn. No defined tread. "They begin here," Bunter noted, "but not before. No trace near the servants' stair or beyond Lady Julia's room. And no sign of them retreating," said Whimsy, eyes narrowed. "None, my lord." "Curious," murmured Whimsy. "A visitor who arrives without arriving and departs without departing, or else a ghost who carries a towel." He stepped into the blue guest room. The bed was crisply made, untouched. The curtains drawn back, the sash window slightly ajar, though no wind stirred the linen. Whimsy stooped to examine the sill. Dust displaced, and, look, fibers. Wool, perhaps, or tweed. Someone sat here, waited. Ghoul, who had followed in with visible impatience, snapped, "But the room's empty now. The housemaid says no one slept in here for a week." "Did she?" said Whimsy mildly. "That makes one wonder who was in it last." He examined the wardrobe, empty save for a slight scent of mothballs, and a hat stand which bore no dust but a single long hair, too pale to belong to Bunter and too short for Miss Alicia. Whimsy turned back. "Inspector, would you oblige me with the names of all present in the house last night?" Ghoul sighed. The victim, of course. Sir Septimus, Lady Julia, his sister-in-law, Miss Alicia, his niece. Mr. Christopher Reeve, the younger son, arrived for the weekend, plus 3 servants, the butler, a housemaid, and a cook. Whimsy raised his brows. No valet. Dismissed 2 months ago, according to the butler. Something about gambling. "Which makes the footprints especially puzzling," murmured Whimsy. "Unless one of the residents walks about in wet boots for pleasure, or for effect." He turned and glanced back down the hallway. "Let's have a word with Miss Alicia next. Telegrams in uppercase demand a reply." Back in the drawing room, Alicia Reeve sat perched like a partridge on the edge of a Queen Anne chair. Her eyes were wide and ringed with sleeplessness. Her fingers gripped a handkerchief with such force that the lace had begun to shred. "Oh, Lord Peter," she exclaimed as he entered. "Thank God. They won't believe me. The police, Inspector Ghoul. He says I imagined it, but I didn't. I heard them." "Footsteps," said Whimsy gently. "Yes, at precisely 13 minutes past 2. I looked at the clock. Upstairs. Above my room. I sleep in the green chamber. The blue one above it was empty. I know it was. Yet someone walked there." She nodded vehemently. Back and forth. Slowly, then nothing. Whimsy regarded her. "Miss Reeve, did your uncle receive any visitors last night?" "Not that I know of." "Did he often set out 2 glasses when drinking?" She hesitated. "He used to. For my aunt. Before she died." "And since?" She looked down. "Sometimes. When he expected my cousin." "Christopher?" "Yes. They would drink together. Talk." "Was Christopher here last night?" "He came after dinner. From London. Said the train was late, but he went straight to bed, I think." Whimsy smiled. "Miss Reeve, might I borrow your shoes?" She blinked. "My shoes?" "Yes, just to rule out a particularly implausible theory." She glanced at Ghoul for permission, then stood unsteadily. Her slippers were neat, embroidered, and incapable of producing the prints Bunter had found. Whimsy bowed. "My thanks. You may reclaim them in full and without forensic insult." As she sat again, he caught the faint trace of perfume, something bitter, floral, and strangely familiar. Back in the hallway, Whimsy murmured, "I should like to speak to Christopher next, but not before we examine the side garden. That open window in the blue room overlooks the hydrangeas. If someone entered or exited by less orthodox means, they'd have left something." He turned to Ghoul. "Would you do me the great kindness, Inspector, of checking whether Mr. Reeve owns a grey herringbone coat? And if it smells of wet wool?" Ghoul stared. "And what if it does?" Whimsy smiled again, that faint, infuriating smile. "Then, my dear Ghoul, we shall know that some ghosts wear rather pedestrian tailoring." Whimsy and Ghoul made their way carefully down the narrow path toward the side garden, the late afternoon light slanting obliquely through the heavy clouds, casting long shadows across the hydrangea bushes. The air was cool and damp, with the faintest hint of impending rain. The garden was tidy but neglected in that peculiar way of country estates when their owners are distracted by more pressing affairs, an imbalance of care that always caught Whimsy's eye. He crouched beside the window that Miss Alicia had said was ajar, running his gloved fingers over the sill, noting the fine layer of dust disturbed in a subtle arc. A window that has been opened, but not recently enough for the dust to settle. I'd wager last night or early this morning. Gould, standing behind him with arms crossed, squinted at the muddy ground beneath the window. "No footprints," he muttered, kicking at the grass. "None at all." Whimsy straightened and surveyed the bushes. "Ah, but look here." He pointed to a faint smear on a lower leaf, a tiny trace of dirt pressed into the glossy green. A handprint, perhaps, left by someone cautious, but not cautious enough. Note the way it curves. Left hand, and not a gardener, judging by the fresh earth beneath the fingernails. Gould bent closer, a flicker of interest breaking his habitual sternness. "So, someone climbed through, or at least touched the window, or attempted to," said Whimsy, eyes twinkling. "One must remember that desperation is a clumsy climber." They moved back toward the house, and Whimsy's gaze caught the angle of a loose slate on the roof above. That might make an inconveniently accessible entry for a determined visitor. "You're suggesting someone broke and entered through the roof?" "More a subtle ingress than a brutish one, Inspector. A thief of shadows, if you will." Back inside, the servants had been summoned to await questioning. The butler, a gaunt man named Finch, carried himself with the proud but nervous dignity of someone who has seen the worst and yet refuses to believe it could touch him personally. The housemaid, Elsie, was pale and twitchy. The cook, Mrs. Mallory, stout and silent, clinging to her kitchen domain as if it were a fortress. Whimsy directed his attention first to Finch. "You have served this household many years, Mr. Finch?" 15, my lord, since Sir Septimus took the house. "And in that time, have you ever witnessed any unusual visitors, particularly after dinner?" The butler hesitated, then said quietly, "Only once, my lord. A gentleman came calling late one night about 2 weeks ago. Sir Septimus was ill then, but he insisted on seeing the visitor. I never caught the man's name, but he wore a grey overcoat and spoke with a clipped accent." "Did Sir Septimus receive him in this very drawing-room?" "No, my lord. Up the stairs, in the blue guest-room." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Gould. "Curious coincidence, is it not?" The housemaid was next. She wrung her hands and glanced furtively at the others before speaking. "I thought I heard footsteps upstairs last night too, my lord. But I was cleaning the library and assumed it was the wind, and sometimes the house settles. Yet, as Miss Reeve insisted, those footsteps were no ordinary creaks. No, my lord, they sounded deliberate, like pacing." "And did anyone else hear them?" The cook grunted. "I was in the kitchen all night, nothing but the clatter of pots." Whimsy smiled thinly. "Ah, but kitchens have walls, Mrs. Mallory, and pots have their limits. Still, your alibi stands until proven otherwise." He moved toward the servants' stairwell. "Tell me, Finch, who had the keys to the blue guest room?" "The keys, my lord. Only Sir Septimus and Lady Julia. And yet the door was found unlocked." "Unlocked, yes, my lord. I locked it every night, I'm quite certain." "Then someone had access, or the door was left open deliberately." Whimsy's mind ticked over the possibilities. The guest room was the nexus of the mystery, its presence both physical and psychological. The footsteps, the ajar window, the absent alibi. It all pointed to a presence unseen, a shadow among shadows. Gould interjected, "And what of Mr. Christopher Reeve? We've not yet spoken to him, have we?" "Not directly," Whimsy replied, "but his name lingers like a spectre." They sought out Christopher in his chamber, a small room overlooking the front drive. He was a slender man in his early 30s, with dark hair slightly tousled and a nervous energy that betrayed sleepless nights. "Mr. Reeve?" Whimsy began with courtly politeness. You arrived late last evening, is that correct? Yes, Lord Peter, Christopher replied, voice taut. The train was delayed. I came straight to my room. Did you venture elsewhere in the house afterward? Christopher shook his head. No, I was exhausted. I went to bed early. Yet I understand you may have lent your coat to a visitor. His eyes flickered. I don't recall lending my coat. Whimsy pressed gently. Do you own a grey herringbone coat by any chance? Yes, Christopher said slowly. It's my favorite. Why? To be sure it hasn't. Being taken for an unintended promenade through the garden at an inconvenient hour. Christopher's gaze darkened. I haven't left my room, I swear. Of course, said Whimsy, with a nod that suggested skepticism wrapped in politeness. The inspector handed over a small bundle to Whimsy. Your coat, Mr. Reeve, he said. We found it hanging in the servants' hall, damp at the hem. Christopher looked puzzled, but his fingers twitched. Whimsy inspected the coat, noting a faint patch of mud on the cuff and a slight dampness consistent with recent exposure to wet earth. Curious indeed, Whimsy mused aloud. Your coat has seen the hydrangeas, Mr. Reeve, and that would place you in the vicinity of the blue guest room's open window. Christopher paled. I don't understand. Maybe it was left there by mistake. Or someone wore it in your absence. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp rap at the door. The housekeeper entered, bearing a telegram addressed to Sir Septimus, marked urgent, and delivered the previous afternoon but only found this morning on the sideboard. Whimsy unfolded the crumpled paper, his eyes scanning the terse message. Meet at midnight. Bring what is owed. The matter is grave. A.C. Someone demanding payment, Gould murmured. Could be a motive. Whimsy folded the note with care. Indeed, and A.C. Curious initials. Not on any of the visitor lists, but potentially a shadowy figure worth locating. Turning back to Christopher, Whimsy's gaze sharpened. You say your cousin was expected last night. Was there any disagreement between Sir Septimus and Mr. Reeve? Christopher's lips twitched. No, but tensions have been rising over the inheritance. Uncle Septimus has been difficult. Whimsy's interest piqued. Inheritance disputes often bring out the worst in families. What of Lady Julia? She seems to have a stake in this as well. Christopher nodded, his expression tight. She was against me, always was. Said I was a spendthrift. And Miss Alicia? A delicate creature. I'm afraid she doesn't understand the gravity of our predicament. Whimsy inclined his head thoughtfully. Family discord, shadowy visitors, mysterious footsteps, an open window, and a coat that tells a tale of its own. Quite the puzzle, Inspector. Gould sighed. If only these clues weren't so confounding. Patience, Gould, Whimsy said, smiling thinly. The game is afoot, and the pieces are moving into place. Now let us return to the drawing room. I fancy a discussion with Lady Julia herself. The afternoon waned as they re-entered the grand room, Lady Julia seated by the fire, her expression a studied calm that did not quite reach her eyes. Lady Julia, Whimsy began, your brother's death has left a cloud over Marple Court that no hearth can dispel. Pray tell, did you notice anything peculiar about last night? She shook her head. Only that Septimus was more irritable than usual. He dismissed all visitors and shut himself away. Your nephew Christopher tells a different tale, that he arrived late but was soon banished to his chamber. A faint flush crossed her cheeks. He's a troublesome boy, always trying to curry favor where none is due. Whimsy's smile was dry. Troublesome indeed, when inheritance is at stake. She rose abruptly, brushing back her gloves. I do not appreciate insinuations, Lord Peter. I loved my brother. If you seek a culprit, look elsewhere. Whimsy inclined his head. Of course, Lady Julia. The guilty often protest the most. As she left, Whimsy turned to Gould. The family is fracturing as we speak, and yet the footprints remain the most tantalizing mystery. who walked the corridors at 1 and 2 but left no shadow. Ghoul grunted. A ghost or a liar? Or a man who knows the house too well and uses its silence as a cloak? The detective's thoughts drifted to the window, the boot prints, the telegram, and the wet coat. Each was a fragment of the whole, like musical notes teasing the full melody. Tomorrow, we speak to the postman and the railway porter. There are secrets in their silence, I suspect. He looked out of the window at the gathering dusk. The estate bathed in grey twilight. The footsteps, he was certain, were a message, and the sender was watching still. Tomorrow, Inspector, the house will speak its secrets, and I, for one, shall be listening closely. The following morning dawned grey and drizzly, the damp air clinging to the skin with an insistent chill. Lord Peter Wimsey found himself lingering over a leisurely breakfast in the oak-panelled dining room of Marple Court, the clink of fine china and the distant cawing of rooks forming an oddly domestic soundtrack to the unnerving events that had unfolded. The household was still unsettled. Servants moved with hushed urgency, eyes averted when they passed the detective and the inspector. Wimsey's gaze drifted to the brass-bound clock on the mantel, its pendulum ticking steadily in a rhythm that seemed both soothing and taunting. The precision of time fascinated him this morning, as always in a murder investigation. So much depended on its exactitude, and yet so often it became a battlefield of contradictions and lies. "Inspector," Wimsey began, swirling his tea with an absent-minded flick of the wrist, "we must attend to our promised inquiries." The postman and the railway porter, two men who traversed the thresholds of this drama without much fanfare, yet doubtless carrying with them threads essential to the tapestry. Ghoul grunted assent, his brow furrowed with the weight of official business. "The postman delivers little more than letters and bills here, but I'll admit, a curious fellow can glean much from the mail." Wimsey tapped his finger against the teacup's rim. "Indeed, the mundane often hides the most potent clues." After a brisk morning rain, the two men set out first to the village post office, a humble brick building smelling faintly of damp paper and leather. Mr. Pevensey, the postmaster, was a stout man in his 60s with a perpetually weather-beaten face and a quick smile that seemed habitually tempered by weariness. "Good morning, Mr. Pevensey," Wimsey began, with the gentle courtliness that always coaxed confidences. "Might you recall if anything unusual arrived for Sir Septimus Marple in recent days?" The postmaster rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Now let me see. There was a telegram, yes, delivered yesterday afternoon. It caused quite a stir, what with the urgency scribbled all over it. Brought by a special messenger, no less. He was a young chap in a grey coat, seemed to be in a bit of a hurry." Wimsey's eyes twinkled imperceptibly. "A grey coat, you say? How intriguing." "And the telegram?" Ghoul inquired. "Sent from London, address not clear. Just a cryptic note. Meet at midnight, bring what is owed. The matter is grave. A.C." Sir Septimus looked troubled after reading it. Wimsey nodded, filing the information away with satisfaction. "Was the sender known to you?" The postmaster shook his head. "No, my lord, just initials." "Thank you, Mr. Pevensey. Your discretion is appreciated." Next, they proceeded to the railway station, a modest platform nestled among overgrown hedges, the iron rails gleaming faintly through the mist. The station master, a spry gentleman named Mr. Hargrove, greeted them with a wary glance. "Inspector, Lord Peter." He nodded curtly. "Mr. Hargrove," Wimsey began, "tell me, did any unusual arrivals come through last evening, particularly around the time Mr. Reeve arrived?" "Indeed," Hargrove said. "Christopher Reeve came by the late train, delayed by some mechanical trouble. But there was also a stranger, a man in a grey overcoat matching your description, who arrived just before Mr. Reeve. He didn't check in, just disappeared into the night." "Did he speak to anyone?" "No, he was tight-lipped, asked for directions to Marple Court, but declined assistance when offered a carriage." Remarkable reticence, Whimsy murmured. And the man's identity? No name given. He paid in cash, a sizable sum for his ticket. Gould exchanged a glance with Whimsy. A mystery man who pays in cash, arrives unannounced, and disappears into the shadows. Precisely, Whimsy said, and I suspect his connection to the telegram is no coincidence. Returning to Marple Court, Whimsy's thoughts were already assembling a new mosaic from these fragments. The grey-coated stranger was no mere passer-by. He was a harbinger of the secrets that now tangled the household in a web of suspicion. Inside the drawing-room, Lady Julia was already awaiting them, her demeanour composed but eyes shadowed with unease. "Have you uncovered anything, Lord Peter?" "Several threads, Lady Julia," Whimsy replied, leading us toward a figure cloaked in grey, both literally and metaphorically. She arched a delicate brow. "I trust you mean no accusations without evidence." "Merely observations, madam," Whimsy said smoothly. "Evidence will follow, as will the truth." He paused, then addressed the group gathered. The servants, Christopher Reeve, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Mallory, who had resumed her silent vigil in the kitchen. "I have some questions for you all. First, about the night of the murder. Who can attest to the whereabouts of everyone between 10 and midnight?" A general murmur arose, with multiple denials and half-confessions. Whimsy listened carefully as contradictions surfaced. The cook claimed to have been preparing a late supper alone. The butler said he was in the wine cellar, and Elsie, the housemaid, insisted she was polishing silver in the servants' hall. Yet, Whimsy mused, the footfalls heard above, the window opened ajar, and the wet footprints suggest more movement than admitted. Who, then, roamed the corridors unseen? Christopher shifted uncomfortably. "I did not leave my room." "Yet your coat was found near the garden," Whimsy countered gently. Christopher's eyes darted. "Someone else must have moved it." "Perhaps," Whimsy said. "Or perhaps you lent your presence to someone else." Lady Julia intervened sharply. "This is preposterous. My nephew is being accused without cause." Whimsy's gaze met hers evenly. "Accusations require proof, Lady Julia, and proofs require patience." Turning back to the servants, Whimsy inquired, "Were there any unusual noises besides the footsteps? Sounds of struggle, perhaps?" Mrs. Mallory's eyes flickered with something like fear. "Only a faint crash in the blue guest room, I think. It woke me briefly." "A crash," Whimsy repeated. "Something broken, disturbed." Gould made a note. "Did anyone investigate immediately?" "Only Finch," Elsie said. "He went upstairs but returned saying everything was in order." "A prudent but perhaps premature assessment," Whimsy remarked dryly. He rose and motioned toward the staircase. "I shall inspect the blue guest room once more. Please accompany me, Inspector." Up the narrow stairs, the air grew cooler and heavier, tinged with the faintest scent of lavender and old parchment. The blue guest room was neat but evidently hastily tidied. A chair pushed back askew, a small vase shattered on the floor, and a faint smear of what looked like dried blood near the window latch. Whimsy knelt to examine it. "This damage appears recent, and the blood, small in quantity but unmistakable. A scratch, perhaps, or a scuffle." Gould frowned. "Yet the servants heard nothing. Which is why, Inspector, we must consider the possibilities of soundproofing or muffled noises. That door," Whimsy gestured to the thick oak, "is often painted shut to deaden sound." He tested the latch carefully and found the door indeed had an extra layer of sealing wax, unusual for a guest room. "A secret within a secret," Whimsy mused. His eyes caught the faint outline of footprints leading from the window-sill to the bed, then toward the door. The perpetrator was cautious but hurried. Returning to the drawing-room, Whimsy addressed the assembled company once more. "I must ask, who among you was aware of Sir Septimus's recent dealings, financial or otherwise?" Christopher spoke up. "Uncle Septimus owed money to several unsavory characters." Such debts often breed desperation, Whimsy said. And desperate men do desperate things. Lady Julia paled. He was trying to settle matters before his death. Indeed, madam. And it appears he was not alone in that endeavor. Whimsy's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. There is more to discover. The letter from A.C., the grey-coated stranger, the mystery of the footsteps, and this room of secrets all point to a truth lurking beneath the surface. The household seemed to hold its breath as Whimsy concluded, "Tonight we shall watch and wait, for in shadows the guilty often betray themselves." As the day lengthened into evening, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. The stage was set for revelations to come, and Lord Peter Whimsy's mind danced eagerly among the pieces, poised for the next move in this intricate game of shadows and mirrors. The evening settled over Marple Court with a damp, creeping chill that seemed to press the walls inward, as though the house itself conspired to hush the secrets it harbored. The steady tapping of rain against leaded windows accompanied the faint flicker of candlelight, lending the old manor a sombre, contemplative air. Within this sombre atmosphere, Lord Peter Whimsy remained keenly alert, his mind oscillating between the fragments of information collected and the silent gaps where truths yet hid. The household had been instructed to maintain their usual routines, albeit under the watchful eyes of Inspector Goole and a few discreet constables. Suspicion hung heavy, a palpable presence as servants whispered furtively in corners and guests avoided one another's gaze. Yet outward civility remained, polished and brittle as the fine china set for dinner. Whimsy paced the drawing-room, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his mind racing through the chronology. The telegram, the grey-coated stranger, the misplaced coat, and the blood-stained guest room, all intricate pieces of a puzzle demanding coherence. "Inspector," Whimsy mused, breaking the silence, "the first task is to reconcile the timeline with the physical evidence. We have a window opened from within, footprints and an apparent scuffle, yet no one heard the tumult, save for the faint crash reported by Mrs. Mallory." Goole nodded. "Soundproofing, as you said. But more than that, the house's layout itself may have muffled the noise. Thick walls, heavy drapes." "Precisely," Whimsy replied, "and I would wager the culprit exploited these features." He motioned toward the staircase. "Shall we examine the corridors anew? A measured pace might reveal subtleties the rush of an emergency would obscure." The two men ascended, their footsteps muted on the threadbare carpet. Whimsy's gaze flicked to the grandfather clock in the hall, a mechanism he now knew was slightly slow, a fact that would bear weight in due course. The clock struck 7 as they reached the corridor, its sonorous chimes echoing faintly. Not quite synchronized, Whimsy noted, and yet one must ask who adjusted it last, and why. They proceeded down the hall, Whimsy's keen eye tracing the line of doors and listening for the faintest creak or draft. Reaching the library, he paused, observing the heavy curtains drawn tightly despite the waning daylight. "An unusual choice," he commented. "Light and air kept at bay. Is there a reason, Inspector?" Goole shrugged. "Perhaps to preserve the books or to mask activity." "Or to conceal a secret meeting," Whimsy suggested with a faint smile. The library was a sanctuary of polished oak and leather-bound tomes, but on closer inspection, Whimsy's gaze was drawn to the fireplace, a grand structure, but one recently disturbed. The hearth contained ashes still warm, and above it a curious irregularity, a small, jagged piece of torn paper wedged beneath a loose brick. Whimsy carefully extracted it, revealing a fragment of a letter, ink-smudged but legible in part. The debt must be settled. No more delays. Midnight rendezvous. Trust no one. A.C. "Ah," Whimsy said softly. "A direct echo of the telegram's sender. This fragment confirms that Sir Septimus's affairs were indeed urgent and clandestine." Who could A.C. be? Goole wondered aloud. A question that will prove pivotal. Perhaps a creditor, a conspirator, or an old acquaintance with leverage. Their attention then shifted to the door leading to the servants' quarters, where Elsie, the housemaid, awaited anxiously. Whimsy's eyes swept over her nervous posture and flushed cheeks. "Miss Elsie," he said gently, "your accounts thus far have been most enlightening, yet one must always be wary of omissions, intentional or otherwise. Were you alone polishing silver that night?" Elsie hesitated, eyes flickering toward the doorway. "No, my lord. Finch was with me for a short while, but he left early." "And Mr. Finch's whereabouts afterward?" Elsie bit her lip. "He said he was going to the kitchen but did not return until after midnight." "Curious," Whimsy murmured. "Thank you, Miss Elsie. Your candor is appreciated." The inspector's brow knitted. If Finch was absent at such a crucial time, that certainly bears scrutiny. Indeed, Finch, the butler, was next summoned for questioning. A tall, stoic man with an austere demeanor, Finch met Whimsy's scrutiny with a calm reserve that bordered on defiance. "Mr. Finch, might you clarify your movements on the night of the tragedy?" Whimsy inquired. "I was in the wine cellar, ensuring the reserves were secure," Finch replied evenly. "I returned upstairs only when called." "Alone?" "Yes." "Did you hear anything unusual?" "No, the house was quiet." Whimsy's gaze was unwavering. Yet others heard footsteps upstairs and the guest room door was found ajar. "Perhaps a visitor," Finch offered. "Or an intruder," Whimsy countered softly. After Finch's departure, Whimsy reflected on the subtle discordance of the servants' statements. No one quite accounted for their whereabouts with the precision expected, and yet the timing was crucial. He turned to Goole. "The question of the coat remains. Whose was it, and why was it found near the garden when its owner swears he never left his room?" Goole rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Reeve claims innocence, but the coat's position contradicts him." "Exactly. Either the coat was moved deliberately, or Mr. Reeve's version is flawed." Whimsy's expression took on a wry tilt. "Or the truth lies somewhere between." The evening passed with an uneasy stillness, punctuated by moments of whispered counsel between Whimsy and the inspector. As the household retired, Whimsy requested to be shown to Sir Septimus's private study. The room was a tableau of faded grandeur, oak shelves sagging under the weight of ledgers and dusty volumes, a large desk cluttered with papers, and a portrait of Sir Septimus himself, looking stern and imperious from the past. Whimsy approached the desk and examined the documents scattered there. Among the accounts and letters lay an envelope, unopened and bearing no seal. With delicate fingers, Whimsy broke the flap and withdrew a letter typed with precision. "My dear Septimus," it began, "your debts and delays have become intolerable. If you value your reputation and safety, meet me at midnight by the old chapel ruins outside Marple. Bring the sum demanded or suffer the consequences. A.C." Whimsy's lips curled slightly. The plot thickens. He glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. The old chapel ruins. A place steeped in superstition, yet, as always, the truth will be mundane if uncomfortable. Goole looked over Whimsy's shoulder. A meeting planned for midnight, the night of the murder. "Exactly, Inspector. The telegram, the letter fragment, and this note all converge on that hour." Whimsy folded the letter carefully and pocketed it. "We must inspect these ruins, and at the appointed hour, to discern what transpired." The inspector hesitated. "You intend to stake out the site?" Whimsy's eyes gleamed. One must sometimes lure the truth from its lair with a touch of theater. Before retiring, Whimsy requested a quick conversation with Christopher Reeve. The young man appeared pale and guarded. "Mr. Reeve," Whimsy began, "your denial of leaving your room, despite your coat's suspicious placement, begs explanation." Christopher swallowed hard. "I was not involved, Lord Peter. I swear it." "Yet the coat." Whose hand might have moved it if not yours? Christopher faltered, then, voice low, I don't know, but I fear there is more here than any of us realize. Whimsy inclined his head. Fear can be a potent force, Mr. Reeve, but it is truth we seek, not shadows. As night deepened, Whimsy and Ghoul prepared to visit the chapel ruins. The wind moaned through the skeletal trees, and a thin mist curled over the uneven stones. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old grievances. They waited in silence, each listening for footsteps, whispers, any sign that the night's secrets might step forth. Minutes stretched into an hour with no interruption. Just as they began to question their vigil, a faint rustling drew their attention. A figure emerged from the mist, a man in a grey coat, unmistakably the stranger whose presence had loomed over the investigation like a spectre. Whimsy stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "You come at a curious hour, sir." The stranger froze, then turned slowly, eyes glinting with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Lord Peter Whimsy," he said, voice gravelly. "I wondered if you would find me." The game had truly begun. In that chilling moment, beneath the indifferent stars, the footprints from upstairs, the whispered warnings, and the shadowed alliances all seemed to converge, promising revelations that would unsettle even the most stalwart of hearts. The stranger's eyes reflected the meager light from the fading lanterns, sharp and unyielding like flint against the misty backdrop. Whimsy regarded him with measured curiosity, noting the way his breath formed small clouds in the chill air and how his gloved hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Indeed," Whimsy replied smoothly. "It appears you are no mere apparition, but a tangible piece of this perplexing puzzle. Might I inquire your name, sir?" The man hesitated, then inclined his head with a faint, almost reluctant acknowledgement. "Alan Cairns, the name you sought." Whimsy gave a subtle nod, the pieces clicking silently into place in his mind. "Mr. Cairns, your communications have been most instructive, if somewhat alarming. Pray, enlighten me. What precisely is your connection to the late Sir Septimus, and what compelled you to issue such stern demands?" Cairns's gaze flicked toward the chapel's crumbling facade before returning to Whimsy. "Septimus owed me money, substantial sums. Business gone awry, debts unpaid. I sought no harm beyond what necessity dictated. But when he ignored my letters and refused meetings, I took more direct measures." "And these measures brought you here on the night in question?" Whimsy pressed. "Yes," Cairns admitted. "We arranged to meet as you've seen in my messages. I expected to collect the debt or negotiate terms. Instead, I found chaos." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Chaos? Blood on the floor. Sir Septimus dead. Did you witness the crime, Mr. Cairns?" "No, I arrived too late. Someone else was already there." The inspector's voice broke the silence. "Did you see anyone flee the scene?" Cairns shook his head. "Only shadows and whispers. I feared for my own safety and left swiftly." Whimsy exhaled slowly, feeling the knot of the mystery tighten rather than loosen. "Your presence at the ruins was no secret, then?" "No, I meant to be found." "Curious," Whimsy mused. "You've played your hand openly, yet you claim ignorance of the actual killing." "Because it wasn't me," Cairns said simply. Whimsy's attention flicked momentarily to Ghoul. "Then who, in your estimation, might have a motive as potent as yours, but a willingness to kill?" Cairns's eyes darkened. "That, Lord Peter, is the question." The conversation was abruptly interrupted by the crunch of gravel behind them. Both men turned to see Christopher Reeve approaching, his face pale but resolute. "Lord Peter," Reeve said breathlessly, "I had to find you. There's something I overheard. Something I shouldn't have." Whimsy gestured for him to speak. "Go on, Mr. Reeve." Reeve swallowed nervously. Last night, before the storm, I heard voices from the study. Sir Septimus and someone else. They were arguing fiercely. I couldn't make out all the words, but one name kept coming up. Lyle. Lyle, Whimsy repeated thoughtfully. An unknown party to us as yet. Ghoul frowned. I'll have a word with the household staff. Perhaps a Lyle is among them or a visitor. Whimsy, meanwhile, scanned the ruins once more. We stand at a crossroads, Inspector. We have the creditor's confession of debt and intended meeting, the young man's overheard name, and the mysterious movements of the servants. He turned to Cairns. Your claim of ignorance is intriguing, but I suspect you know more than you admit. Perhaps, Cairns said cautiously, but I am no murderer. Yet presence alone does not clear suspicion. Whimsy's gaze settled on the uneven stones beneath their feet. Tell me, Mr. Cairns, did you notice anything unusual upon your arrival at the ruins? Any signs of struggle or concealment? Cairns hesitated. A broken branch, some footprints leading away toward the north path. Leading away, Whimsy murmured, which suggests the killer fled on foot, perhaps attempting to mislead. Exactly, Cairns affirmed. Tell me about these footprints. Were they large or small? Large. Heavy boots, I'd say. Whimsy's mind raced. Finch, the butler, had boots fitting that description, but Finch's alibi placed him in the wine cellar, unless that alibi was crafted with deceit. The inspector interrupted Whimsy's thoughts. We'll need to examine those footprints at first light. Whimsy agreed. Indeed, but the timing remains our greatest challenge. The grandfather clock's slow hands, the servant's uncertain movements, the hidden letters, all suggest a carefully staged event designed to confuse. Someone planned this with meticulous care, Ghoul observed grimly, and yet left faint, telling traces, footsteps, a torn letter, a misplaced coat, Whimsy added, which will unravel the facade. They lingered in the misty ruins, the cold seeping through their coats, the night silence heavy with expectation. The game had shifted, the players revealed but not yet exposed. Returning to the house, Whimsy requested to examine the grandfather clock more closely. Under the dim lamp in the hallway, he inspected the mechanism, noting a small, recently oiled cog and a slight looseness in the pendulum's suspension. Someone slowed the clock deliberately, he announced, to distort the timeline, a clever ploy to alibi a suspect or sow confusion. Ghoul whistled softly. Who could have such access and skill? Only someone intimately familiar with the house and its workings, Whimsy replied. Most likely a member of the household staff. Finch, perhaps? Precisely my thought. Whimsy paused, then raised a finger with a sudden spark. But what of Christopher Reeve? His overheard mention of Lyle, a name unknown to us, but critical. We must inquire into this mystery. He motioned for a servant to fetch the household roster and any correspondence mentioning a Lyle. Minutes later, an aged footman returned with a worn ledger. Whimsy scanned the pages swiftly, his mind weaving connections. Ah, he said quietly, a Mr. Harold Lyle, former solicitor and long-time advisor to the Hammersmith estate, recently dismissed under strained circumstances. Could he have motive to interfere? Ghoul asked. Possibly. But the question is whether he is present, or his influence reaches through others. Whimsy turned to Cairns. Mr. Cairns, did Sir Septimus mention Mr. Lyle in your dealings? Cairns frowned. Only that Lyle had been a thorn in his side for years, meddling in affairs best left alone. Then a tangled web we have indeed. The night wore on, and as the household settled into uneasy sleep, Whimsy's mind remained alert. He considered the psychological tensions simmering beneath the surface. A desperate debtor, a betrayed client, a young heir caught in conflicting loyalties, and a housekeeper whose watchfulness concealed more than she revealed. He resolved that the morrow would bring new inquiries, renewed scrutiny of alibis, and the testing of hypotheses forged in the shadowed forge of deduction. Yet for now, the silent house whispered only to itself, and the footprints from upstairs waited patiently to tell their story. The first hints of dawn crept through the heavy drapes of Marple Court, casting pale light over the quiet rooms where suspicion and whispered anxieties still lingered like shadows that refused to fade. Lord Peter Wimsey rose with the morning, mind already racing ahead, piecing together the strands of the mystery from the night's revelations. The storm had passed, leaving the earth sodden and heavy with the scent of rain and wet stone, but the question that gripped him was not the weather. It was the tangled web of motives and misdirections within the household. At breakfast, the atmosphere was taut. The usual clinks of china and murmured greetings seemed forced, strained by the weight of unspoken accusations. Wimsey noted the faces around the table. Mrs. Mallory pale but composed, Reeve restless and guarded, Finch calm yet watchful, and Elsie, the maid, who stole glances as if afraid to meet any eyes for too long. Inspector Gould was present as well, his ever-calculating gaze moving steadily over the group. "Mr. Reeve," Wimsey began casually, his tone disarming, "I wonder if you might clarify something for me. You mentioned hearing the name Lyle during your nocturnal vigil. Would you be so kind as to recount precisely what you overheard?" Christopher shifted uneasily in his seat but nodded. "It was late. I was near the study's door. I heard Sir Septimus speaking to someone." The voice was gruff and angry. "I couldn't hear everything, but one phrase repeated, 'You have no right, Lyle.' Then the other voice responded, 'The debt must be paid, one way or another.' I could only catch those snippets before I moved away." "Very illuminating," Wimsey said, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "And did you recognize the second voice?" "No, I did not. It was unfamiliar." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Gould. "Then we must find this Mr. Lyle, if indeed he is more than a spectre of past grievances." He rose and signaled the butler. "Pray summon the housekeeper, Mrs. Mallory, and also inquire if any letters or visitors have been recorded mentioning Lyle in recent weeks." As the household staff moved to comply, Wimsey turned to Finch. "You have been forthright, Mr. Finch, but I must ask again. Were you absolutely alone in the wine cellar last night?" Finch's jaw tightened, but he replied steadily, "Yes, Lord Peter. I was there until I heard a commotion and was called away." "And no one passed you in the corridors?" Wimsey pressed. "No." "Very well." Wimsey's mind returned to the altered clock, the tampered pendulum. Someone manipulated time itself to confuse us. Such precision suggests inside knowledge and access. Gould added grimly, "Which narrows our suspects to the staff or household members." The housekeeper, Mrs. Mallory, was ushered in. A woman of stern bearing, with eyes sharp and observant, despite her polite exterior. "Mrs. Mallory, do you recall any visitors or correspondences from a Mr. Harold Lyle?" Wimsey asked. She pursed her lips. "Mr. Lyle was the family solicitor, but he was dismissed some months ago after a disagreement over Sir Septimus's finances. No letters have arrived from him since then, but there were rumors he remained displeased." "Displeased enough to return uninvited?" "That I cannot say, my lord." Wimsey nodded. "We shall see." The next step was clear. Find Harold Lyle and question him. But first, Wimsey wished to explore another thread. The torn letter fragment found in the library. Signed with those initials, A.C. Allen Cairns, the creditor, had confirmed his role. But what of other connections? "Inspector," Wimsey said quietly, "I intend to examine the servants' quarters more closely. If the clock was manipulated, someone with access there might also have moved other items. Perhaps the coat found outside, or the torn letter itself." Together, they moved to the dimly lit servants' hallway. Wimsey inspected the layout, the worn floors, the closets and nooks where a coat could be hidden or secret messages slipped unnoticed. As he crouched near the coat rack, a glint caught his eye. A small metal key, bent and worn, lay half hidden beneath a loose floorboard. He pocketed it carefully. "This may unlock a door or drawer relevant to our inquiries," Gould agreed. "We shall search at once." Returning to the main house, Whimsy requested a full inventory of locked drawers and cabinets in Sir Septimus's study and elsewhere. The key found was soon matched to a small, unassuming box hidden behind a false panel in the study's bookcase. Inside were documents, correspondence between Septimus and various creditors, but also a ledger detailing recent transactions. One entry stood out, a payment made to a HL, dated just days before the murder. The sum was significant, suggesting a recent attempt at reconciliation. "Harold Lyle remains very much in the picture," Whimsy murmured. Gould considered the implications. Could this be motive for interference or confrontation? Likely, and yet our mystery deepens. Why would Cairns meet Septimus at midnight if Lyle remained a looming threat? Perhaps Cairns was unaware of Lyle's actions, or perhaps they colluded. Whimsy smiled thinly. A collaboration between creditor and former solicitor to exert pressure? It is plausible. A sudden knock interrupted their conference. Elsie entered hesitantly, holding a small parcel. "Forgive me, my lords, but this was found tucked in the lining of Mr. Reeves' coat, which was left outside last night." Whimsy took the parcel, noting its rough wrapping. Inside lay a folded note, penned hastily. "Meet me alone, by the garden. Gate, midnight. There is much to fear and none to trust. A.C." The handwriting matched the torn fragment. Reeves' face paled. I don't understand. I did not place this note." "Someone is weaving a web of deceit, Mr. Reeve, and using you as a pawn," Whimsy said gently. "Then who is the puppet master?" Reeve demanded. "That remains to be seen." The day wore on as Whimsy and Gould summoned and questioned the staff again, this time with sharper focus. Under the weight of scrutiny, Finch's composed facade began to crack. An accidental slip revealed knowledge of the grandfather clock's mechanism beyond that of a mere butler. Whimsy seized upon this. "Mr. Finch, are you familiar with the workings of the clock?" Finch hesitated. "I maintain many things in the house, my lord. The clock was no exception. And the slowing of the pendulum. No, I would never interfere with the timepiece. Yet someone did." The butler's gaze wavered. Later, Whimsy visited Reeves' room, seeking signs of struggle or secret communications. Among the belongings, he found a ledger with names crossed out and notes in the margin, including Lyle and Cairns. Reeve confessed he had been trying to manage debts and avoid scandal, caught between conflicting forces. "Mr. Reeve, it appears you are entangled more deeply than you realize." Whimsy's thoughts circled back to the mysterious meeting and the motive beneath all: desperation, greed, and betrayal. The final piece, he suspected, lay in the interplay between the three men: Septimus, Cairns, and Lyle. As dusk settled once more over Marple Court, Whimsy prepared to confront the truth. The stage was set for the unmasking and the resolution of the shadows that had fallen across the household. The night awaited, and with it, the final act of this intricate drama. Lord Peter Whimsy stood quietly in the study, the evening shadows pooling thickly beneath the tall bookcases as the last dying embers of daylight slipped beyond the mullioned windows. The faint ticking of the grandfather clock, steady and solemn, filled the room. A metronome marking the measured passage of time and, paradoxically, the key to unraveling the mystery. He glanced at the scattered papers on the desk, the ledger entries and the notes discovered earlier, each fragment a piece of the intricate puzzle. Across the hall, footsteps echoed faintly, tentative and light. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. The sound came not from the front hall, where servants would tread briskly, but from upstairs, from the very floor above where the murder had occurred. His curiosity piqued Whimsy moved silently to the door, pausing to listen. There it was again. The faint shuffle of feet on the creaking wooden floor, a soft cough, then silence. Someone was moving stealthily, perhaps seeking to avoid detection, or perhaps lost in their own conflicted thoughts. The butler, Finch, appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by thought. "My lord, I heard the same footsteps when checking the upper corridors a moment ago. There is no one expected upstairs at this hour." Whimsy inclined his head thoughtfully. "An unscheduled visitor or a restless conscience?" Finch's lips twitched in a barely suppressed smirk. "Perhaps both, my lord." They ascended the creaky staircase together, the air growing cooler and more charged with tension. Each step seemed to whisper secrets, the house itself conspiring to reveal its concealed truths. Reaching the second-floor landing, Whimsy paused to peer down the dimly lit corridor. The flicker of a candle caught the edge of his vision, a pale, wavering glow emanating from the partially open door of the East Wing guest room. Whimsy approached quietly, careful not to disturb whatever clandestine activity might be underway. The door creaked softly as he nudged it ajar. Inside, a figure bent over a small writing desk, penning feverishly. The room was modest but orderly, with a faint scent of lavender and old parchment. The occupant startled, turning sharply to reveal none other than Mr. Harold Lyle, the disgraced solicitor. "Good evening, Mr. Lyle," Whimsy said with calm precision, his voice carrying that unmistakable arch. "I trust I am not intruding." Lyle straightened, a flush rising to his cheeks. "Lord Peter, I was unaware you would be upstairs. No intrusion, I assure you." "Curious hours for correspondence," Whimsy observed, stepping fully into the room. "Pray, may I inquire what concerns keep you awake at such a late hour?" Lyle hesitated, then gestured to the paper before him. "I was drafting a letter to Sir Septimus, a plea for reconciliation, or at least clarity. I've acted with no ill intent." Whimsy's gaze flicked to the letter, noting the tentative tone and choice of words, a man desperate to regain lost trust or to stake his claim amidst shifting allegiances. "Your return, Mr. Lyle, was unexpected, given your estrangement from the household. A financial dispute, yes. Yet my conscience urged me to seek resolution. I feared Sir Septimus's recent behavior might lead to ruin for all involved." "Understandable. And yet your presence complicates matters. Your past disagreements, your recent payment. The ledger suggests you attempted to mediate rather than exacerbate tensions." Lyle sighed deeply. "Indeed, I wish to help. Help often takes curious forms in situations such as these," Whimsy mused, "and appearances can deceive. Tell me, did you meet Mr. Cairns last night?" Lyle's face tightened. "I did not. Yet your arrival coincides suspiciously with his visit." "I cannot speak to his actions," Lyle replied sharply. Before Whimsy could respond, a sudden noise startled them both. A soft thud from the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps retreating down the stairs. Whimsy and Lyle exchanged a glance and hurried to the door. Peering out, they saw no one, but the faint echo of retreating steps lingered. "An interloper," Whimsy said quietly, "or a guilty conscience fleeing the scene." He motioned Lyle to remain. Quietly, he descended the staircase, following the faintest trail of footsteps to the main hall, where a window stood ajar, the curtains fluttering in the chill night breeze. Whimsy stepped outside, eyes scanning the garden bathed in moonlight. The dew glistened on the hedges, and the silhouette of the garden gate stood dark and silent. There, partially hidden among the shadows, he spotted the coat previously found outside. He knelt to examine it once more, confirming the fabric and faint traces of mud that matched the garden path. Returning inside, Whimsy pondered the significance. Someone had been in the garden late at night, likely meeting or escaping through the gate. The note from Cairns had instructed a midnight meeting at precisely that location. "Inspector," Whimsy said upon rejoining Goole, The garden gate is a critical locus. If we are to uncover the motive behind these midnight encounters, we must watch this threshold carefully. Gould nodded, already pulling on his coat. A stakeout then? Indeed. But first I must confront Mr. Cairns and challenge him with these discoveries. Cairns awaited them in the drawing-room, visibly agitated, the firelight casting sharp shadows across his gaunt features. Wimsey wasted no time. "Mr. Cairns, your note summoned Mr. Reeve to the garden gate, yet you deny any knowledge of Mr. Lyle's involvement." Cairns' eyes darted nervously. "I do. I wish to keep the meeting discreet, to discuss financial matters only." "And the payment you received days before the murder? A gesture of goodwill?" "Merely a settlement, nothing more. Yet the timing is curious." Cairns's composure cracked. "I did what I must to protect my interests. Sir Septimus was reckless with his debts." "Reckless indeed," Wimsey replied softly. "But did your concerns justify murder?" The room grew tense, Cairns' defenses tightening. "I will not be accused on mere suspicion." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "We shall see what evidence reveals. For now, rest assured that every footstep, every note, every altered clock hands guides us toward the truth." That night, under the watchful eyes of Wimsey and Inspector Gould, a vigil was kept near the garden gate. Hours passed slowly, the silence punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and distant hoot of an owl. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, a figure moving with deliberate caution toward the gate. Wimsey's heart quickened. The mystery, long simmering, was poised to reach its crescendo. The figure paused, glancing nervously about before reaching into a pocket. A folded paper was drawn, mirroring the notes found earlier. The figure hesitated, then slipped the paper beneath the gate latch. Wimsey stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Good evening. I believe you have some explaining to do." Caught in the act, the figure turned slowly. It was none other than Elsie, the maid, her face pale but resolute. "Miss Elsie," Wimsey said, "your role in this tale is far from minor. Pray, enlighten us." She swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. "I wanted to help, my lord. I feared for Mr. Reeve and for the household. Secrets have been kept, and I could bear it no longer." Wimsey listened as she recounted a tangled narrative of hidden meetings, whispered threats, and desperate attempts to protect those she cared for. The footsteps upstairs, the secret notes, the midnight rendezvous, all threads woven by a woman caught in the tide of events beyond her control. As dawn approached, the pieces shifted once more, the web of suspicion tightening. Wimsey knew that the unmasking of the murderer was near. But as always, the truth would be stranger and more human than any Gothic tale of shadows and ghosts. The house at Marple Court held its breath, awaiting the final revelation. The first faint blush of dawn cast a pale glow over Marple Court as the household stirred from its uneasy slumber. The tension that had thickened the air during the nocturnal vigil did not dissipate with the changing light. Instead, it coiled tighter, wrapping every inhabitant in a web of suspicion and unspoken dread. Lord Peter Wimsey, standing by the great bay window of the drawing-room, surveyed the courtyard with a calm detachment, a faint smile playing upon his lips that suggested amusement rather than relief. Inspector Gould, ever the pragmatist, entered briskly, bearing the morning's reports. "No sign of anyone attempting to flee, my lord. The staff have been questioned anew, though their responses remain, shall we say, predictably evasive." He paused, adjusting his cap as if steeling himself for the revelations to come. But Miss Elsie's admission does throw a new light on the sequence of events. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, the maid's nocturnal excursion was a gambit born of fear and loyalty, a human element often underestimated in these affairs. Her actions, however misguided, offer us a vantage point from which to examine the labyrinthine relationships within this household. Their conversation was interrupted by the entrance of Miss Grace Pennington, Sir Septimus's sister and the unofficial matriarch of Marple Court. Her expression was one of carefully maintained composure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension. "My lord," she began, "there is much unrest amongst the staff. Whispers, furtive glances, and an undercurrent of blame that grows thicker with each hour. I fear the scandal will engulf us all if it is not swiftly resolved." Wimsey inclined his head. "The truth," Miss Pennington once revealed, "has a peculiar habit of both destroying and liberating. It is our duty to ensure it. Serves the latter purpose here." He motioned for her to continue. She hesitated, then confided, "There is one matter I have not yet disclosed. Sir Septimus's study, the very room where he was found, contains a hidden compartment within the bookcase, one that conceals letters of great delicacy. I believe these may hold the key to his last days." Intrigued, Wimsey requested immediate access. The bookcase, a splendid piece of carved oak, had indeed eluded thorough examination. After a moment's inspection, Wimsey discovered a faint groove along the edge of one shelf. A subtle press-and-slide mechanism revealed a narrow compartment, dust motes disturbed as the panel gave way to reveal a trove of letters bound by a faded ribbon. Carefully extracting them, Wimsey began to read. The correspondence detailed a clandestine financial arrangement gone awry, implicating several of the household's principal figures in debts and betrayals. Sir Septimus had been entangled in a web of blackmail and desperation, his reputation and fortune threatened by those he had once trusted implicitly. "These letters," Wimsey murmured, "paint a picture of a man besieged not only by external creditors, but by internal treachery. The devil, as always, is in the details." He examined the dates and cross-referenced them with the known movements of the suspects. A pattern emerged: secret meetings, coded notes, and subtle shifts in allegiance. The late-night garden rendezvous, previously ascribed to financial negotiations, now hinted at a desperate attempt to reclaim control. Summoning Inspector Gould, Wimsey outlined his deductions. The murder was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a calculated elimination born of fear that Sir Septimus would expose a network of deception. The inspector, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, asked, "And the killer, my lord?" Wimsey's eyes gleamed. "That, Inspector, is where our earlier observations converge. The seemingly trivial details, the misaligned clocks, the unlocked doors, the footsteps from upstairs, all were orchestrated to mislead." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The killer sought to construct an alibi that relied on confusion and the assumption of supernatural interference. But human motives and mechanical evidence are less forgiving. At that moment, the study door opened, and in walked Mrs. Lydia Cairns, the widow of the solicitor. Her posture was erect, but her face bore the strain of sleepless nights. "My lord," she began, voice steady though edged with desperation, "I implore you to consider the consequences of your suspicions. My late husband was a man of honor, albeit flawed. The accusations against him must be tempered with compassion." Wimsey regarded her with a measured gaze. "Mrs. Cairns, justice requires neither cruelty nor sentimentality, but truth. Your husband's innocence or guilt will be determined not by emotion, but by facts." She faltered, then whispered, "There is one thing you should know. Sir Septimus was not the only one under threat. My husband received anonymous letters in recent weeks, warning him to desist from prying into matters best left alone." The room grew still. Wimsey folded the letters carefully. "These threats are the thread we must follow." He turned to the assembled company. "Tonight, we shall set the stage for the final act, illuminating the darkness with light and reason." As dusk settled once more over Marple Court, Lord Peter Wimsey prepared his carefully crafted denouement, confident that the truth, once uncovered, would reveal not only the murderer, but the tangled motives that had driven a man to death within these very walls. As the final vestiges of twilight faded into the inky cloak of night, the great hall of Marple Court was transformed into a theatre of shadows and whispered anticipation. Lord Peter Wimsey stood at the centre, the very image of composed intellect, his posture relaxed yet commanding, like a conductor poised before the opening note of a symphony. Around him, the assembled company of suspects and witnesses, each bearing the burden of suspicion, awaited the unveiling that would rend the delicate veil of deceit and expose the true architect of the sinister deed. Wimsey began not with a flourish, but with an invitation to observation, his voice steady and rich with the arch inflection that bespoke both wit and wisdom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have dwelt long enough in the realm of supposition and conjecture. It is time now to confront the uncomfortable truths that lurk behind polite facades. He gestured towards the room's ornate clock, which had, as all had noted, kept irregular time. The mechanism of this clock, much like the events we have examined, is not as straightforward as it appears. Its misalignment is no accident but a deliberate intervention, designed to confuse and mislead. Turning to the gathered faces, some pale and anxious, others hardened with defiance, Wimsey continued, "The footsteps heard upstairs, the supposed phantom pacing, were, in fact, a carefully timed deception. Our unfortunate Sir Septimus was led to believe that his tormentor was a spectre from beyond the grave, a fiction crafted to unnerve and destabilize." He paused to allow this to sink in before moving to the mantel, where lay the incriminating letters recently discovered. These letters reveal a network of financial intrigue and blackmail, implicating several parties who stood to gain from Sir Septimus's silence or absence. Wimsey's eyes rested on Mrs. Lydia Cairns, whose earlier plea for compassion now seemed a shield rather than a solace. "Mrs. Cairns, your late husband's threats tell a tale of desperation, but desperation can drive men to dark acts." The widow's face hardened, but she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Let us consider, then," Wimsey resumed, "the movements on the night in question. The timeline, carefully reconstructed, shows that the victim was confronted in his study at precisely 11:17 p.m. The alibis presented for that hour, when scrutinized against the house's layout and the staff's accounts, reveal inconsistencies too glaring to ignore. He beckoned to Inspector Gould, who produced a floor plan of the house. "Note here the soundproofing of the library door, and here the unlocked window leading to the servants' quarters." The footsteps were deliberately muffled, and the route chosen to ensure the absence of witnesses. Wimsey's gaze swept the room once more. The person who committed this crime was intimately familiar with the household's rhythms and secrets. They orchestrated the events to shift suspicion onto spectral imaginings and misdirected blame. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Now, observe the peculiar detail of the misaligned clocks. The study clock was deliberately set 5 minutes fast, while the hall clock lagged behind by 3. This temporal distortion was a critical element in the killer's plan to establish an alibi. He turned to the tall figure of Mr. Harold Finch, the solicitor's erstwhile partner, whose nervous twitch betrayed a deeper agitation than his usual veneer of composure. "Mr. Finch," Wimsey said gently, "your claim of being in the billiard room during the hour of the murder is undermined by your failure to notice that the billiard room clock had stopped altogether." The solicitor's face flushed crimson. I was distressed. I did not think to check the timepiece. An odd oversight, would you not agree? Especially for a man of your meticulous profession." Finch swallowed hard, but said nothing. Wimsey then addressed the entire assembly. "The final piece of this puzzle lies not in the grandiose deceptions, but in a seemingly trivial detail, the missing salver from the study. It was this object, removed in haste, that contained the key to the blackmail, a ledger concealed beneath its velvet lining." He motioned to Inspector Gould, who retrieved a small, ornate tray from the evidence table. Contained within were entries, cryptic yet unmistakably tying Mr. Finch to the machinations that led to Sir Septimus's ruin. A sharp intake of breath echoed around the room. The ledger exposed Mr. Finch's duplicity, his attempts to manipulate both client and colleague, to leverage information for personal gain. When Sir Septimus threatened exposure, Mr. Finch took desperate measures. Whimsy's voice softened but held a cutting edge. Murder, Mr. Finch, is the ultimate gamble of the desperate. Your carefully woven tapestry of lies has unraveled under the scrutiny of time and truth. Harold Finch's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. It was not meant to go so far, he confessed, voice hoarse. He confronted me with the letters. I panicked. Whimsy inclined his head. Panic is a poor counselor, yet a human one. Your actions, while criminal, stem from the very human frailties we all share: fear, greed, and the need to protect one's fragile reputation. The inspector stepped forward to place a firm hand on Finch's arm. You are under arrest. As Finch was led away, a tense silence filled the room. Miss Grace Pennington, her composure restored, whispered, I suppose the peace of Marple Court will be hard won after this. Whimsy allowed himself a small smile. Peace born of truth, Miss Pennington, is the only kind worth having. He turned to Mrs. Cairns, whose eyes now shimmered with a reluctant acceptance. Justice has been served, madam, and with it, perhaps, a measure of closure. The assembled company began to disperse, the oppressive atmosphere lifting incrementally with each step taken away from the scene of tragedy. Lord Peter Whimsy remained by the window a moment longer, contemplating the interplay of light and shadow across the ancient stones of Marple Court. With a final, wry remark, he murmured to himself, as Shakespeare might have said, the truth will out, though it sleep in never so vile a place. It seems our nocturnal spectre was merely the shadow of human frailty. And with that, he took up his hat and cane, bidding farewell to a house that would long remember the evening when the footsteps came from upstairs, and the truth came down like dawn. The house had settled into a heavy silence by the time Lord Peter Whimsy returned to the drawing-room, where only a handful of lingering guests remained, their faces etched with the fatigue of sleepless nights and uneasy revelations. The flickering firelight cast long shadows that danced upon the walls, as though reluctant to reveal the secrets now laid bare. Whimsy's eyes, sharp and amused beneath his finely arched brows, swept the room with the calm assurance of one who has untangled a most perplexing knot. We have traveled far through the maze of misdirection and human folly, he began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a scholar lecturing on some arcane mystery. It is time to draw the final curtain. He paused deliberately, allowing the weight of his words to settle. This investigation hinged upon two principal deceptions: the false footsteps heard above and the confounding manipulation of time. Both were instruments wielded not by spirits, but by a living hand. Turning to Miss Pennington, whose calm composure had been a fortress throughout, he added, Your insight regarding the discrepancies in the clockwork was invaluable. The two clocks, one running fast, the other slow, were crucial in fabricating an alibi and disorienting the household. A faint smile flickered upon her lips. I only wished to make sense of the chaos. Indeed, Whimsy agreed. But the crux of the matter lies in the psychological entanglement of the parties involved. Sir Septimus, burdened by debts and threats, was ensnared in a web of his own weaving, and the desperate attempt to conceal this led to tragedy. His gaze then settled upon Harold Finch, now pale and resigned. Your duplicity, Mr. Finch, was born of greed and fear. The ledger concealed within the missing salver revealed the extent of your machinations, a ledger that you thought removed from sight, but which the meticulous eye of justice has uncovered. Finch's eyes dropped, the fight extinguished. I did what I must. I never meant to kill him. Whimsy's tone softened, as if extending a reluctant sympathy. Yet the measure of one's actions is weighed not by intent alone, but by consequence. In attempting to silence Sir Septimus, you sealed your own fate. The detective turned once more to the assembly. Let us not forget Mrs. Cairns, whose grief was compounded by secrets better left unspoken, and Miss Pennington, whose steadfast resolve prevented further calamity. Each has played a part in this sombre tale. As the police moved to take Finch into custody, Wimsey stepped to the window, gazing out upon the now tranquil grounds. It is often said that the night reveals our truest nature, stripping away pretense and polite illusion. Tonight, Marple Court has been no exception. He paused, then offered a wry flourish. And as the bard might remind us, when sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. Yet even amidst such darkness, reason and justice hold the lamp aloft. With a final nod, Wimsey turned and prepared to depart, leaving behind a household forever altered, but at last unshackled by mystery. The footsteps that came from upstairs were silent now, replaced by the steady, comforting march of truth.